Good morning on this Sunday, June 18th. A happy Father's Day to all the dads watching, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Former President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to federal charges in Miami just 3 days after his visit to the Georgia GOP convention. Atlanta's homicide rate is down by 30%, and former U.S. Senate candidate Herschel Walker is back at his alma mater, UGA. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
In Miami Tuesday, former President Trump entered a not guilty plea on federal charges involving his handling of classified documents. These latest charges came just days after former President Trump took center stage at Georgia's GOP convention.
And we have a thug who's in charge. This is a political hit job.
Georgia Republicans heard the former president say these latest charges over classified documents amounts to election interference, calling the prosecutor deranged. He also slammed Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis.
In Atlanta, people are afraid to walk to their local grocery store for a loaf of bread for fear of being assaulted or murdered. And yet, your local District Attorney Fani Willis is spending all of her energy, all of her money, all of her time trying to get Trump. Let's get Trump.
Meanwhile, Fani Willis said this week the new federal charges will have no impact on the Fulton County elections investigation. Janelle, you were at the convention, so I want to focus first on the former president's remarks, and then we'll talk about the new leadership for the Georgia GOP. Okay. But just your thoughts on former President Trump's message. I mean, he's clearly defiant.
Yeah, I think that his message was on message for President Trump. I think that he came in right off of this whole indictment, and he was ready. He came in hot, you know. A lot of people there were excited about what he had to say. I do think that it's important to note that there were also a lot of people there that wanted to hear more about policy, more about this next term, and less about the indictment and less about the election stuff. So when I talked to people, I got kind of a mixed crowd, a mixed emotion. So I thought that was a little bit interesting and different for Georgia.
Did you want to hear more about policy?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Theron, that's interesting. You know, his speech really fires up his base, and when he slams these prosecutors. But what do you think? How does it play to Georgia voters?
Well, I'm glad Janelle, called balls and strikes, and I know you're a Braves fan, and you go Braves. But yeah, that is what was lacking. Is we talked about on this show, will Donald Trump move on from the 2022 and 2020 elections, right? And clearly he didn't. He slammed the district attorney in Florida. By the way, the judge that will actually oversee this case in Florida with these 37 federal indictments is a Trump-appointed judge.
As a federal prosecutor.
Yeah, and the federal prosecutor as well. So I think that, it's really, I don't know. I mean, Phil and Janelle can tell us, I don't know why he's now seeming to gang in the polls when it comes to Republican voters. But ultimately, I think that the more Trump tries to divide his own party and tries to attack district attorneys and judges and federal prosecutors, I think it further puts the GOP away from moderate independent voters and disaffected Republicans who Democrats are going to need to win.
Phil, you were also at the convention. These latest charges really aren't having much of an impact in the polling that I saw across the country. But what about here in Georgia?
Well, it was interesting that just right after his speech at the convention, he raised $7 million in that 24-hour period, and his polling has gone up to 60% in various national polls. He's fighting back, which a lot of Republicans and even people in the center politically like. I mean, here, think about what President Biden is doing. Almost every week he slams MAGA Republicans, this and that. That's 74 million people. And that's pretty stupid if you're politically want to run for re-election. And so getting back, and I do differ with my friend Janelle a little bit. He spent about 5 minutes on what he was going to do in his first day and first week. He was going to issue these executive orders. He's going to seal the border in 6 months. He's going to be energy independent. Unlike Biden, I could go on and on. But I think politically, I think that when it comes to DA Fani Willis in Fulton County, I think that we've only heard the indictment. Doesn't sound good, but we haven't heard anything yet from Trump's lawyers and Trump's legal team. So I think it's going to play out, and I think the key point here, and every Republican of every stripe that I know says this, it is wrong for a sitting president to have his Justice Department go after with legal weaponry his leading opponent. It's wrong.
Melita.
The indictment was returned by a grand jury. We need to remember that first. The other thing is, when you talk about Trump's legal team, we have to talk about what a dwindling legal team it is, because it's hard for him to find a lawyer these days because he won't keep his mouth shut and follow legal advice. There's no lawyer on earth who wants a client who runs his mouth with such great abandon as former twice impeached, now twice indicted President Trump. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the charges end up being out of Fulton County. The more the former president runs his mouth, the more he potentially incriminates himself. So Fani Willis has a lot to work with when it comes to returning indictments in early August.
All right, well, let's talk about the new leadership of the Georgia Republican Party. Janelle, I know you threw your support behind Rebecca Yardley for chairwoman, but former State Senator Josh McCoon replaces David Schaefer. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we kind of went into this knowing it was going to be a tight race. And the reason why I supported Rebecca is because I think that in our party we have a little bit of a challenge. You have a lot of activists and not a lot of leaders. I feel like when it comes to activism, the focus is typically one track, right? So we have people who are really, really focused on the election. We have people who are really, really focused on the indictment. But we don't have I personally feel like we're lacking leadership. I think we're off the mission of the state party. When I worked at the state party as the deputy state director, the deputy state director, I realized early that the mission was to win elections. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And a lot of the resolutions that they put forth were resolutions that alienated people. It was things that pushed people away. And I was really concerned about that. I felt like Rebecca had a plan on how we can actually galvanize, come together and win elections. And that's the part that I feel it's interesting. I'm interested to see what happens in 2024.
So Phil, let me take it over to you then, the other Republican on our panel, because were some of the leaders of the party just not there? Like Governor Brian Kemp, Attorney General Chris Carr, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Is this the leadership that Janelle refers to versus the activists?
Well, the good news is when Josh McCoon won the chairmanship on the first ballot, and I was a friend to all, they were all good candidates for chairman, Brian Kemp immediately texted Josh McCoon and congratulated him and said, we need to meet and we need to have unity. And so did Attorney General Chris Carr, some of the other constitutional officers. So I thought it was a class act by Rebecca Yardley and, of course, the other challenger to Josh McCoon, Dennis Futch. They all came to the microphone in a show of unity. They all said, this is our new chairman. We're going to move ahead united. So I think it's very optimistic what, especially with Kemp and with McCoon going to be meeting. I think it's going to be unity.
Well, Theron, I used to interview former Senator Josh McCoon when I covered the Capitol almost every day when he was pushing for ethics reform. I mean, that was his big push down there. A lot of people didn't like him down there because of that. But do you think this is a new direction for the Republican Party?
I also remember Senator Josh McCoon as well. I mean, as a lobbyist who had to lobby him on a few issues, I mean, he's very smart. But if you pay attention to his Twitter page, which I have over the years, he's not afraid to get in a back and forth on how conservative he is versus some Democrats. And so I think, look, I think I said this last week, it was no secret that Governor Kemp and former State Senator David Schaefer did not get along. They did not agree on the path of the party. Kemp said, hey, I was not going to go to an event and support a chairman who supported the entire Trump ticket in a Republican primary who was running against other people. And so I think we have to wait and see. But I think Senator McCoon, now Chairman McCoon's biggest challenge is how do you keep this Trump base together in a Republican Party when you're trying to say, hey, we're going to move on from Trump and move on from the election deniers. How does he keep that base together? And I'll be interested to see.
Melita and then Janelle. Melita, can Senator McCoon be a unifier of this party?
Well, it's going to be very difficult for him to unify when his other top officers are all election deniers. And when you have somebody who's as conservative as Brian Pritchett, and who has been convicted of felonies in the past as your vice chair. So he's going to have to consolidate his leadership team behind his vision before he can even go out to the rest if if he works with that team.
Janelle, is this what you were referring to?
Yeah, you know what I wanted to add to is that what I saw there was that there is a separation, right? There are people who are dedicated to the activist side of politics, and I think that is very, very necessary. There are people that we know from across the state that have good hearts, good intentions, and really want to see us win. But the problem I have is when the people who have the good hearts and that are really pushing these things are not getting all of the information. And that was part of my challenge too, is that I felt like there was some misinformation towards Rebecca. I mean, people said that the governor had given her over $100,000, and that wasn't true. And I don't even know where it came from. We suspect, but we don't know exactly where it came from. So there was a lot of misinformation that was happening as well. So when you start to turn people who have a good heart and actually want to do good in the wrong direction, that's a problem for me.
Misinformation in politics?
Yeah, I'm
At a
sure.
Republican
Whoa,
convention?
what?
In any race?
Exactly. Up next, we'll discuss some welcome news for the city of Atlanta. Homicides are down 30% compared to this time last year.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
After years of discussing the increase in violent crime within the city of Atlanta, the Atlanta Police Department reports homicides are down 32% compared to this time last year. Theron, we still have a long way to go, but Mayor Andre Dickens made this a priority of his administration.
So the thing about when the crime rate is down, you got to make sure you message around it the right way. And I think what you saw from the mayor this week, Lori, was that he said, first and foremost, the federal funding that's coming to Atlanta, we're going to use that money. We're not sending anything back. So I think that was really good for residents to hear. Secondly, a lot of this credit goes to the mayor, this council, but also Chief Sherbaum, and also the women and men who are there, because when I talk to officers, and I know Phil does this as well, I always ask about the morale. So I know the morale is up. The use of technology is up. They're trying to retain officers and hire more officers, so you see more people applying for the academy. So while I am very happy that we see it being this low, I think that what you saw was a very specific messaging from the city to say, hey, these are the things of why it's low, because if it goes back up, I hope it doesn't,
right.
Then the critics are going to criticize. And so, hats off to the work that's been done, but I think, as you mentioned, we got a long way to go.
And Phil, I mean, you were the most critical on this panel of the city of Atlanta and the crime rate. What are your thoughts on what's happening now?
I'm going to agree with some of the points that Theron made. I see morale is up too, and that's good. So far, so good. And we do have better technology. We have those license readers.
Yes.
And so, knock on wood, let's hope. However, there's still a perception of fear, sadly, when I talk to people in the city of Atlanta. No. Is that perception going to wane? Let's hope so.
All right. Melita, go ahead.
Well, I think we need to heed the advice that the police gave as they talked about this, and be careful about how people manage conflicts, and be careful about leaving guns in unlocked cars.
Can never say that too many times. Well, in Washington, Congresswoman Lucy McBath is one of several Democrats attempting to get around Republican leadership to try and get votes on several gun control measures. Melita, back to you. I mean, I assume that this is a very steep uphill battle.
It is an uphill battle, but this parliamentary procedure of using a discharge petition to try and force a vote just shows that they believe there to be some Republicans who will support these three measures they're trying to do, the assault weapon ban and two others. And polling demonstrates that the vast majority of the people in this country want some sort of sensible gun reform. They're not trying to confiscate weapons. They are trying to put some sensible barriers around how guns are purchased and used.
Janelle, is there room here for some sensible gun reform?
I think we've seen a lot of sensible gun reform that has taken place. And I think it's more so around just kind of targeting mental health and things of that nature. I just have to say that Congressman Lucy McBath is just not a good congresswoman. And I have to say this because I live in her district. I lived in her district in the 6th, and then I got redistricted out, and I'm in the 7th, and I'm still with her. And I know nothing about her. I don't see her. She doesn't send anything to the Republicans about her town halls if she's having them. And then when it comes to certain issues, she only kind of highlights and stands on issues that are, with the Democratic Party. So I don't feel represented as her constituent. But I will say this too: when it comes to the whole gun control, gun laws, and things like that, I just really want people to focus a little bit more on the person pulling the trigger and not so much the trigger, because I think when we start focusing in on the weapon, we're losing sight of the person, and there's a lot of mental health things that we can do.
Well, Theron, before I move on, you can address what she said about Congresswoman Lucy McBath.
Well, Janelle, I think, I'll say this on the air. I would love to facilitate a meeting between you and Congresswoman Lucy McBath, because I think what you would find, and I know you met with her more times, she's a good listener, and I just push back respectfully to saying that she's not a good Congresswoman. I think her constituent services actually is one of the best in the state. But I also want to applaud her for not giving up this fight. And notice what Melita said. We're all for, as Democrats, law-abiding citizens who want to be responsible gun owners. We're all for that. But when you start getting into these assault weapons and people who are mentally ill who get access to these stolen guns and these assault weapons and killing kids and shooting up malls and in schools, I think that's where it lies. So I want to applaud her for trying to get the bipartisan support.
Okay, I want to move on because we've had 2 confidential reports on Georgia's election system that were unsealed by a federal judge this week. One report highlighted vulnerabilities that could potentially enable vote manipulation, while the other report determined that the risk of that happening is remote. Phil.
Well, very quickly, there were 2 reports that came out, and you know what? You can call it election denying if you want, but that's false. These are questioning things. One of the reports done by cybersecurity experts and endorsed by the leading experts in the country say that there are deep flaws. Melita and I touched on this last week, and we had a moment of agreement there. There are a lot of questions going on with this Dominion system, and shockingly, in my opinion, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said, oh, we're not going to fix any of these problems until 2025. Well, you're just signaling that there's weaknesses in the system. And so the other report, called the Mitri report, defends Raffensperger and the system. And Melita, we just found out that 20 experts have signed a petition calling for the withdrawal of this Mitri report because of all the flaws and mistakes in it.
Melita, I got to go to you because there are very few times where you and Phil agree.
That's true. But the letter that was released on Friday morning calls for the company that did their report, the Mitri report he's talking about, to withdraw their report because they didn't even have access to the voting machines. They made false assumptions. And of course, both reports were issued before the Coffee County data breach and the theft of the machinery from DeKalb County. So bad actors now have access to the guts of the whole Georgia voting system, and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is refusing to update the software until after the 2024 elections. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Judge Totenberg does in the coming weeks.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, a state economist says it may be time to scale back Georgia's lucrative film tax credits. We'll discuss next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
State fiscal economist Jeffrey Dorfman went before a joint Georgia House Senate committee studying tax breaks and said huge tax breaks for industries like the film industry, well, they don't make a lot of fiscal sense. Phil, you look around the states, you see those yellow signs that signal a production. They're everywhere. Studios are opening up in all parts of Georgia. I mean, should lawmakers look at scaling back this tax break that has done so much good also for the state?
Well, I'm not opposed to a legislative committee looking at tax breaks. Some are good, some are bad. I happen to think that the film tax break has been great for the state of Georgia. I don't mind looking at it. I want to hear the arguments for perhaps capping it. I don't think we should do away with it. But I think the big question we all ought to ask, and this is what the lawmakers are going to be asking, is what is the return to the taxpayer? And that's the big question. Some of these economic projects, they're not a good return. And so that ought to be ended.
Theron, this was a packed house by lobbyists down there.
It was.
For good reason, right? They were protecting their clients. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the one thing that I like that when you look at this, the reason this tax credit sort of conversation was having was to protect, attract, and retain business in Georgia. So you got to look at the good that's been done with the economy. You're incentivizing these companies to not only come to Georgia, but also stay here. And look, the one that has proven to be very, very successful is the film tax credit. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, Laura, I mean, I know that while we're dealing with a writer's strike right now, there are so many people that I know, young and older, who depend on this film business to feed their families. And so I think the committee was very careful to say, hey, we're not here to take away tax credits. We're just trying to figure out ways we can improve them and make sure, to Phil's point, that the taxpayers feel that their money is being spent wisely.
Well, the AJC's Greg Bluestein, our buddy, had quite a scoop this week, reporting that former U.S. Senate candidate Herschel Walker is back at UGA, taking classes, perhaps taking steps to earn his college degree. Janelle, we haven't heard much from Walker since his defeat.
Right. No, I think this is good, right? I know there was a lot of conversation around him not having a degree when he ran for Senate. So, you know, I wish him all the best. I hope he does well in his classes. I wouldn't go back to college if it was the last thing to do, but good for him.
Melita.
I'll agree with Janelle. Good for him. It'll be the ultimate test of whether you can teach an old DAWG new tricks.
I want to say this too. Look, I'm happy
Yes.
that he's gone back to school,
Yes.
because I think that's going to give so many people. I know a lot of folks that have come like a semester short, a year short, and going back. So I want to applaud Herschel for going back to school. I was with President Moorhead this week, and he watches the show, Phil. He says, I do really good, you know, talking about your alma mater.
That's
but
not what he told me.
That's what he told you. I just talked to him. I know he watches. But no, I think we gotta say nice things about Herschel to want to go back. And it's going to be very humbling for him. I mean, it's a
Yes.
lot has changed.
And you know,
since
he's around town. He frequents a restaurant that I go to. I don't know where Bluestein got that.
Oh, where restaurant is that?
I'm not going to tell you what the restaurant is. You probably have it boycotted.
No, I'll just come join you, and I'll pay for you.
All right, we're moving on. Melita, back to you because I want to get your take on a groundbreaking lawsuit. Cumberland Island's feral horses have become unexpected plaintiffs, alleging negligence by federal and state agencies. The lawsuit seeks the gradual removal of the horses along with veterinary care, proper nourishment, and an assessment of their overall welfare. I mean, these are popular animals. And
They are
beautiful.
very popular animals. They predate the Declaration of Independence, horses on that island. And Cumberland, of course, is the largest barrier island along the Georgia coast. And the horses there have a much shorter life expectancy than horses in other places because of the poor care they're receiving. So I hope the horses get a win-win as a result of this lawsuit and better care under the supervision of the State Department of Natural Resources. And the other thing that's underlying this lawsuit is the fact that the horses are destroying habitat for other animals such as sea turtles.
And I mean, probably the reason for this lawsuit is really to draw attention to the fact of what's going on there, Janelle.
Yeah, and I did a lot of research on this, right? Because I haven't been to Cumberland Island yet, but I want to go and I want to see the horses. But the fact that they were brought there, I think they're saying that they were brought there in was it 1742, around with this from the Spanish, and so it's not necessarily a natural habitat, you know. So I'm okay with removing some. But I don't think we should remove all because it is a part of the tourism, and I don't want to impact businesses.
Darren, she did do it research.
No comment for me. Look, people love their horses. I love horses, and I just think, you know, applauding you guys for really doing the research.
I'm on the side of the horses,
Yeah,
too.
I'm with the horses. You know?
Yeah.
We will leave it there. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Janelle, we'll start with you.
All right, so first, happy Father's Day to all of the dads that are here, as well as to my husband, Kelvin, and my dad. So happy Father's Day. And next, I want to highlight a academy. So With Academy, and that's spelled W-Y-T-H-E, is located in Grant Park, and they are it's an apolitical environment, kind of like a homeschooling environment, but they have their open house coming up. So you can go to withacademy.com, and again, that's spelled W-Y-T-H-E, academy.com. And I have a loser. My loser this week is former President Obama for coming after Tim Scott, saying that he finds Tim Scott's remarks on racism as skeptical. Now, he can't tell us it's wrong, but it's just skeptical. And I'm just really tired of the gatekeeping and the propaganda to the black community, so I really want him to move on.
Darren.
Well, happy Juneteenth, and also happy Father's Day to all the fathers. I also want to make Michael Tyler a winner, who was announced this week to be the communications director for the re-election campaign of President Joe Biden. I also want to give a big shout out to Diane Larche, who will be hosting her family food fest on Father's Day. She's been doing this for a very long time. She's a dear friend. Could keep up the good work. Also, big shout out to State Representative Derek Jackson, who was re-elected in a seat that he once formerly held, and he got re-elected in that seat. Also want to give a shout out to my boy Gary at Benny's Shoes, one of the best shoe shines, man, in the city. So Gary, I got you in. And then lastly, on a more personal note, I want to sort of send my faith and sort of prayers to Janet Thrasher and Joyce Carmichael. You guys may have saw this. Woman, Miss Carmichael, who is in Thrasher, who have lived in the Kirkwood community for over 50 years, had a house fire. So definitely want to let them know we're praying for their family.
Yes, our thoughts are with them. Phil.
Well, winner, of course, we discussed GOP Chairman Josh McCoon, who's just taking over. You know, there's a mirror image to your Democrat Michael Tyler, and that is Brian Jack. He's from Peachtree City. He is actually a top aide to President Trump. He also is a liaison to Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and keep an eye on his career. My loser is President Biden in this so-called Pride event they had at the White House this past week. I felt like I was watching the last days of the degenerate Roman Empire. I've been to the White House for events in my career. I've never seen people flashing people, taking off their clothes. It's a disgrace. Even the White House admitted it got out of control.
Happy Pride Month.
Melita.
Well, on Juneteenth, there will be a televised program on Monday evening, and among the winners and honored is the Morris Brown College president, so congratulations to him. The Gwinnett School of Mathematics, Science, and Technology is number 11 on a list, and the only Georgia school on a list of the top 50 high schools in the nation. Spoiler alert, by comparison, the state of Illinois has 10 schools on that list.
Nice. All right. Well, and a happy Father's Day to all those dads out there watching, especially to my dad, Ducky, who watches you all and loves you all every week. So make it a great one. We'll see you next week.